Welcome everyone. We're just going to wait a few minutes for folks to join and then we will get started. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. Hi everyone, my name's Amanda Speciali. I'm a program specialist with the Adaptation Sciences program. Today, this is the Adaptation Sciences FY2023 competition information session with a focus on submitting a full proposal. So we're just going to go around the room and introduce everybody. So Lisa.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm Lisa Vaughn, and I work with our Adaptation Sciences program here in the Climate Program Office. I lead our international programs and work as a program manager as part of the Adaptation Sciences team. Thanks.
Great. Alec?
Hey everyone, I'm Alex Shub. I work in our International Adaptation Sciences program and I coordinate our Blue Carbon project, which is an international project. Thanks.
Thanks. Andrea?
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Morales Barbosa. I also work with Lisa and Alec in our international adaptation science programming focused on islands.
Thank you. Bhaskar?
Hi, my name is Bhaskar. I'm a program manager in AdSci with a focus on coastal resilience. Thank you.
Thanks. And Anne?
Hi everyone, my name is Anne and I work on CPO's grant team.
Great, thank you everybody. And Alec, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, we're just gonna quickly go over some webinar logistics for today. If you can hear me, you're already connected to the broadcast. You do not need to call in. If you hear any feedback and you have connected via your phone, please hang up and make sure that your computer's audio is turned on. If you have a question, please write it in the questions section. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, and we'll hopefully be able to get to all your questions. And a recording and slides of this information session will be provided on our AdSci FY2023 funding opportunity webpage, specifically on the frequently asked questions webpage. Bhaskar will go ahead and put a link in the chat so you know where that is. And we're hoping to have that up within a couple of days of this session. And we're also planning to update our frequently asked questions as appropriate based on our session today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to give our presentation today.
Great, thanks, Amanda. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for taking some time out of your day to join us and for your interest in the AdSci 23 funding competition. Today, we'd like to hit on a few topics related to the competition. We've already introduced you to our member of the AdSci team. And we will then spend a little bit of time providing an overview of the NOAA Adaptation Sciences program. We did have an information session a couple of, I guess it was about, I don't know, a month and a half, 2 months ago, focused on the program that is up on our website that you're welcome to view if you weren't able to join that initial session. So in the interest of not repeating everything, that's posted on the web already, we're just going to kind of hit the highlights of the AdSci program, and the competition for this year. We will provide some kind of synthesis overall, very high level feedback from the letter of intent process that might be helpful for some of you who submitted LOIs, but then also those who didn't have a chance to as they're not formally required in order to submit a full proposal. And then we will dive into the full proposal submission process and the timeline. And then, as Amanda said, we'll wrap up with the a question and answer session. And I do want to just point out here that we're not able to provide specific feedback on project concepts in this session, or even kind of specific themes. That really is the intent of the LOI process. But if you do have additional questions on that, you can feel free to reach out to me after this session. All right, Alec, next. All right, so I won't dive too much into this, but just for broad context, this application is part of one of our NOAA programs. NOAA has an integrated mission of science, service, and stewardship with a focus on understanding and predicting changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts, and getting the information coming out of our research and engagement efforts into the hands of decision makers and policymakers. Next slide, if you would, Alec. So, I mean, what's a presentation without an org structure? NOAA has multiple line offices. The program that we're talking about today is part of NOAA's Oceanic and Atmospheric Research line, and we all sit in the Climate Program Office. OAR, NOAA Research, is composed of laboratories and program offices, and we are one of those program offices that supports external and internal NOAA research and partnerships. We work closely, by the way, with the other line offices, in particular, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the National Ocean Service, and the National Weather Service. So you'll see some connections here in the themes and the topics that we're interested in working on. Next slide, if you would, Alec. So the Adaptation Sciences program sits in the Climate and Societal Interactions division. We have multiple programs within our office, and I'll talk about kind of the two bigger ones in just a second. But essentially, research supported by this division seeks to generate the knowledge, tools, and institutional networks and partnerships that enhance society's capacity to anticipate, plan for, and adapt to climate impacts. By supporting partnerships between scientists and stakeholders, CSI enhances the capacity of decision makers to effectively co-produce and utilize climate information in risk management, adaptation, and sustainable development. Our work really focuses on complementing the physical science research and development portfolio across NOAA by using insights from social science research to interpret, synthesize, and apply climate data analysis and observations. So the programs and the activities supported by our division focus on identifying and assessing risks and impacts, informing decisions through the co-production of knowledge, and building capacity through partnerships and stakeholder engagement. Next, if you would please, Alec. So as I mentioned, we have kind of two core programs within the CSI division. One is the Adaptation Sciences program that we're talking about today, and the other is the recently renamed Climate Adaptation Partnerships Program, which is formerly known as RISA, the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessment Programs. Together, the programs work to improve climate resilience and preparedness in diverse socioeconomic regions and sectors throughout the US and abroad through knowledge generation, engagement, and partnerships. While both programs conduct interdisciplinary research at the intersection of communities and climate in close partnership with stakeholders, they contribute complementary but distinct capabilities to CSI, CPO, and NOAA. The AdSci program is composed of several lines of effort that reflect societal needs and opportunities for collaboration. Our current lines of effort include partnerships and research projects focused on climate impacts on fisheries and pathways for adaptation in fishing communities. And that is our CAFA program, and they recently had their proposal deadline for projects for their FY2023 competition. Some of you might have also submitted to that program. The next line of effort focuses on water resources challenges and opportunities in coastal communities. And then finally, the topic that we're focusing here on today is international collaboration to advance adaptation and resilience. All right, next, Alec. Thank you. So just a few notes about the program. This Adaptation Sciences program was launched in 2021, but it really builds on previous programs that we had here in the office, focused on specific sectors. And some of you may have been involved in those or may have engaged with them in the past. The projects were SARP, COCA, and IRAP. The goal of the AdSci program is really to foster adaptation and resilience by supporting research and partnerships focused on two key issues. One is really developing an understanding of the key drivers and conditions that shape and enable adaptation across temporal and spatial scales. And the other is identifying key aspects of and promoting opportunities for the use of climate information to support preparedness and adaptation planning. All right, next, if you would, Alec. So within the AdSci program framework, our international program element works with partners in the public and private sector in the US and outside of the US to enhance the knowledge, engagement, and capacity needed to foster adaptation and resilience in the face of a climate that is changing. So a little bit of context here for the FY23 AdSci NOFO, and I won't go into too much detail here because this is the portion that is recorded. But really, international collaboration is part of our history here in CSI and actually in the climate program itself. NOAA really values working with international partners to develop climate knowledge and information services for decision making, for risk management, for adaptation, and working to find ways to use this information in sectors such as agriculture, water resources, management, public health, and safety. Increasingly, we've recognized the value of thinking about work conducted across systems. So how these different sectors are integrated, how decisions in one might affect outcomes in another, has really become an important focus of our program over recent years. As part of these efforts, NOAA has established a partnership with the Department of State and other US government agencies to support adaptation and resilience in island nations. Some of the projects supported through this competition, in fact, may receive funding through this partnership. We're still using the same application process, but I just wanted to highlight that some of the funding for this research competition will probably come from the State Department. And then finally, I just want to note the importance of PREPARE, which is the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, which was announced just over a year ago at COP26 in Glasgow. And NOAA is one of the partner agencies that is working together to take a whole of government approach to supporting adaptation and resilience in partner countries. Okay, next, Alec, if you would. So through this competition, which I know is really what people want to talk about, Alec, I'm still seeing the context. Can you go to the next one?
Hang on.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that one. Thank you very much, Alec. So through this competition, we are seeking proposals for interdisciplinary adaptation research activities to identify and better understand evolving climate risks, vulnerabilities, and adaptive capacity, and then to foster the integration of this knowledge into adaptation and resilience planning for islands in the Caribbean and the Pacific regions. As I mentioned earlier, we really are encouraging applicants to consider risks and solutions related to compound events and cascading impacts across sectors that have critical implications for systems that are important to society. We want to emphasize projects that result in usable information about climate impacts, vulnerabilities, and solutions. We are also interested in understanding and identifying and strengthening adaptive capacity of institutions, community sectors, and islands, and the integration of climate information in adaptation planning, action, and long-term resilience strategies. All right, next, Alec. So as everyone probably has read in the NOFO, we'd like for proposals to address one or more of the topics that are listed here on these slides. And I'm sorry, there's so many words and not a lot of photos or pictures or graphics on these slides. but we just want to make sure that we share the details with everybody. So the 3 topics here would be, identifying evolving risks and vulnerabilities, evaluating, test, or scaling up approaches to mitigating risk and advancing effective adaptation, and advanced understanding of some of the key barriers and enabling conditions that influence outcomes related to adaptation and resilience. All right, next, Alec. And just to remind everyone, we do have a specific regional focus for this competition, and we would like applications to address 1 or more of the islands here. You can have all of the work focused on region A, or 1 or 2 places in region A, or some of the work can be done in region A, some of it could be in region B. And we can talk some more about that if there are additional questions. But all of the work has to focus on at least 1 of the places on this list. Proposals should be for projects up to 2 years in duration with a budget of up to $150,000 per year. So the maximum length for these proposals is 2 years, or for the projects is 2 years, and then the total budget can be up to $300,000. But we just need to make sure that people understand that it can only be up to $150,000 a year. In other words, you can't do $25,000 in 1 year and $275,000 in another. All right, next, Alec. So I'd like to touch here on kind of some key priorities and interests, and maybe some reminders related to the competition. We are very much of an interdisciplinary program with a very strong social science focus. Our research projects should include and be shaped by engagements with stakeholders, so participatory research. We really want our researchers and partners that we're supporting through this program to be grounded in the actual decision needs and capabilities of the people that they're working with. Projects should really strive to enhance community, sub-regional, national, and regional engagement, and networks that really incorporate locally relevant knowledge and support local decision making. Our programs across the board within CSI are very focused on co-development of effective climate services techniques, understanding best practices, methods, and frameworks. And then there's a list here of some of the sectors that we're interested in supporting, research focused on these. And, as I mentioned earlier, projects that would look across them are increasingly kind of a priority within our program. All projects that we support out of CSI, and in fact out of the Climate Program Office, should seek to incorporate the principles of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we'll talk in a couple of minutes about kind of the component of the proposal, really 2 components where we want to see that. And then finally, I just want to point out, and I'll kind of come back to this when we get to the LOI feedback, we do want to remind everyone that this is a research program, as opposed to a program where we're supporting the implementation of adaptation projects and actions. And we'll talk about this, like I said, in a minute here, but we are very open to, capacity building, technical exchanges, trainings, workshops, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, but they have to be couched and kind of embedded in a research program approach. All right, next, Alec. So first, I want to start off by saying that we received so many really interesting letters of intent. And there are a lot of really worthy projects out there with good people, well-qualified people behind them, tackling important issues related to, the environment, climate change, impacts, economics. But I do want to kind of pull us back here to remind applicants that we are sitting in the Climate Program Office. And so we do want to make sure that the climate dimension is really clear and really strong in all of the projects that we support out of this program. So that's kind of point one. Point two is what I just mentioned about the need for this to really be framed in a research context. So all of the proposals should really identify either one or a series of overarching research questions that would be addressed in the work. And then the methodology can talk about how, you know, trainings, workshops, peer-to-peer learning opportunities, et cetera, the development of you know, education, outreach materials, all of that would actually be embedded in the research plan. So it should be addressed in the methodology of the proposal. And then finally, you know, we don't have all of the resources in the world at our fingertips, and the challenge of understanding and tackling climate change is so huge that we do really look for ways to scale up and kind of expand the impact of the work that we're supporting beyond the initial study site. So if you think about, you know, you want your impact to kind of be twofold. One, you want to make an impact and leave a footprint in the study site where you're working, but we also want to think about and see in the proposals ideas for how that work could be scaled up or shared beyond, you know, this particular project to have a broader impact. So we want to make sure that our projects are looking to do more than just fund, you know, peer-reviewed publications, although we recognize that those are also very important. And I'll be honest with you, there weren't tons of proposals submitted that, you know, kind of stopped at the publication stage, which is really great to see. So I think this community is very interested in kind of that approach. So that was really exciting. All right, next slide, Alec. So one of the things that we kind of challenge ourselves to do here in the office when we're writing, and then, you know, we encourage you all as potential applicants to think about is, can you articulate your proposal, the work you want to do, in one sentence? That can sometimes help us organize our thoughts. And I will say that when someone does that well in a proposal, it's very helpful in the review process. So we would encourage you to think about doing that and including that in your abstract or in the early section of your proposal. We want to remind everyone to be super clear about the proposed methodology in the proposal and how that kind of plays out over a 2-year time period. Our proposal process, overall, you know, funding competition proposal process, has 2 dimensions. The LOI is kind of like a higher level, you know, project concept note that doesn't require tons of detail, because we're just giving you that initial feedback, and we don't want you to spend tons of time working on something before you even see if it's really kind of in the ballpark of what we're looking for as a program. That changes when we get to the proposal status, the proposal phase, though. And there are very clear guidelines, which we'll walk through in a minute, about what needs to be in the proposal. We want to make sure that, you know, the methodology is something that when it is being reviewed by people outside of our office, it's very clear and it flows, and the reviewer can see how it all fits together. I noted that we want to see your stakeholder engagement as part of your methodology, and I'll also note here that we want to see, you know, the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion in your methodology, if those are indeed part of how you're approaching your project. Okay, let's see. All PIs, which are principal investigators, for folks that may be coming from outside of a traditional research setting, PIs are principal investigators. We want to make sure that you list all of your PIs, your partners, your primary participants, and if you can, provide letters of support. Let's see, I already talked about this stakeholder engagement strategy. Here's one thing that we want to make sure. We got a decent number of LOIs from outside of the region. So researchers that might be on the continental US but want to work in some of the islands, for example. A couple of thoughts here. I think it's really helpful to have someone on the team who is located in the region and connected to the existing kind of networks and research community, decision-making community. If you're not able to do that, though, you want to make sure that you are showing that the work you're proposing is really reflecting the priorities of the islands and the locations where you will be working. Letters of support, are one way to do that. In your proposal, also, citing maybe national adaptation plans or, national level, strategies related to adaptation. So you can kind of make that connection with what the priorities are in your location. I talked a little bit about the importance of just the transferability of the project's outcomes and outputs, and we recognize that one size doesn't suit all needs here. So it's not necessarily that you're creating data or a process that could just be picked up and dropped somewhere else, but we like to learn from these projects, and learn by doing is an important aspect to our program. So thinking about, well, would this be transferable, and if so, how would we get the information, how would we share our knowledge, is important. We encourage you to discuss and address the linkages to any existing NOAA programs or infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I really mean our networks and kind of our activities. So NOAA has offices and programs that touch on a lot of the places where we have identified as priorities for this competition. We really encourage you to partner with those groups. The Climate Adaptation Partnerships, formerly known as RISA program, for example, would be one of the programs run out of our office, but there are tons of them throughout the Fisheries Service and throughout NOS and the Weather Service. So if you're going to work with NOAA data or partners, we really encourage you to highlight that and emphasize it in the proposal. And then finally, just make sure you carefully review and consider the statement of diversity and inclusion, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So Alec, next. Okay, so I want to make sure and point out to folks that there have been several changes in the NOFO. Nothing has changed in terms of the content or the focus of the NOFO, but there have been some kind of administrative changes, noting specific page limits, for example. So when you sit down to write your final proposal and start all the paperwork, et cetera, please go back to the NOFO. The most recent version is dated yesterday, 12/12 on grants.gov, and we really encourage you to kind of check back in on the NOFO and make sure nothing else has changed, because things happen and things can be missed. And then also keep checking the frequently asked questions, and we'll try to keep a note on there on that landing page that you see that indicates when it was last updated. So the NOFO is kind of the overarching piece. The second piece that we want to pay attention to is the information sheet. And basically the difference between the two, the NOFO is part of a standard system through which the US government solicits proposals. It has certain attributes. The information sheet goes a little bit more into kind of the context for the program priorities. Make sure you read both. Just a heads up, when we have reviewers look at these proposals, we give them the NOFO and we give them the information sheet. And those are used by the reviewers to evaluate the proposals and see kind of how closely they were able to address the priorities and how well they did. The next document here, well, not document, but the next link is the frequently asked questions. I talked about that. And then finally, the Adaptation Sciences website. And I do encourage those of you who haven't been involved in our programs before to go back to that website and click through some of the previously funded projects just to get an idea of the type of work that we normally fund, and kind of the balance of, social science with some physical science as part of it. But as I mentioned earlier, we really are looking at societal impacts and the interactions between climate and communities and decision making. So we tend to have a strong social science component. In terms of where we are in our process, the LOI deadline has passed. That was the end of October. Anyone who submitted an LOI should have received feedback from us by now. We really do our best to read these carefully and try to provide helpful guidance. The three responses that went out were basically, yep, this is spot on. We encourage you to submit a full proposal. There were those really 99.9% that were great concepts, but not necessarily a good match for the competition. And then those that were partially responsive, where if you added a particular component that seemed to be missing, it would make it more responsive. And as tough as a process as that is, we know how much time people put into writing proposals. And so we want to make sure that if you're investing your time, it is something that is, you know, within the scope and we think has a shot of reviewing well. And we don't want people, you know, who want to do a totally different kind of research to apply to this program and spend hours doing that. And then also, you know, we rely on members of the community to help review these. We want to make sure that that we're using everybody's time efficiently. And just because the proposal wasn't encouraged, you know, PIs can still submit an application, and that you know, one of the reasons that we do try to provide feedback is if there is another way to approach their topic and they think that maybe working with different partners or changing their methodology might make it more responsive, you know, they still get all the information. So we are in the process where applications are due. They're due the end of January. We apologize for the timing over this late December time period. We know it's tough, but this is kind of the way the funding cycle works. All right, let's just skip into next slide, Alec, if you would. Okay, so all of this information is available in the NOFO and in the information sheet, but we wanted to kind of put it on some slides to make it a little bit easier to find. But if you have any questions about the next couple of slides, please go into the NOFO. So I just mentioned you can submit a full application even if you did not submit an LOI. And I noted that even if your proposal was not encouraged, you could technically still submit a full application. This is something that was actually modified in the NOFO. Full proposals are limited to 35 pages, 40 if there are 3 or more principal investigators. Principal investigators are not the same as partners. Principal investigators are individuals that would receive funding. You can partner with people and you can have a long list of partners, and they're not necessarily PIs. So just keeping this in mind for people who might be coming from institutions that don't normally apply to US government programs. So I won't read through all this, but there's the rest of the slide talks about the page limits and what is included and what is not included in those page limits. So just take a look at those when you get a chance. Full proposals have to be submitted via grants.gov. So with our LOI process, as I mentioned earlier, it's a little less formal. So, you know, we communicate with you via email, you submit the LOI to us, we review it and we respond back. The process becomes much more formal and all proposals must be submitted through grants.gov. The exception to this is if you don't have internet or if you can't submit through grants.gov, you can mail them to us, and the information where to mail them is in the NOFO. Please note, regular old mail, well, I guess express delivery or whatever you want to use, but not email. We cannot accept email proposals. If you are interested in applying and you're with a federal agency, please reach out to me because the rules are slightly different for federal agencies. But just so we don't confuse everyone, let's just say everything has to be grants.gov unless you are not able to do that, and then you can mail them to us by the due date. I would suggest that if you plan on mailing, you give us a heads up just so we can make sure to kind of look out for it. And the instructions for how to mail proposals are in the NOFO itself. My colleague Anne is going to talk about this in a minute, but regardless of how you submit your proposals, you want to make sure that you are registered and you have all the information required, like you need a unique, what's it called, EIN. You need certain attributes in order to apply that you are going to go through a system to apply for, and that doesn't make a lot of sense, but Anne will talk about that in a minute. Sometimes the computer world can be a little glitchy, or the internet shuts down, or there's a storm somewhere. People have had problems submitting to Grants Online. We really encourage you to aim to submit your proposals a week before the deadline at least, so that if you do run into any problems, you have a chance to call the helpline and have someone walk you through things. All projects should use September 1st, 2023 as the start date for the projects. And just a reminder that the application deadline is January 31st, 2023, 5 p.m. Eastern time. And we cannot make any exceptions for this, and that's really unfortunate. When, you know, we miss a great proposal coming in because of the deadline. So if you have any questions about that, let us know, but definitely start early. So Anne, I'm gonna give everyone a break from listening to me and let you walk through the next few slides, if you would.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Anne. I will walk you through the registration process. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right.
Alec, can you go one slide?
Yeah, I think we covered this. There we go. Thank you. So if you're new to this process and you haven't applied for a federal grant before, you should know that there are multiple layers of registration involved before you can actually submit your application. So primarily the first step would be to get an employer identification number, or the EIN, from the IRS. You're going to need the EIN in order to register on sam.gov, which is where you'll obtain your unique entity ID. And then in order to submit your application, you'll have to create an account on grants.gov. And once you've created an account on grants.gov, you'll need both your EIN and unique entity ID in order to fill out the required financial forms that are part of the application package. Next slide, please. So an EIN, or employer identification number, is just a 9-digit number issued by the IRS. The IRS uses the number to identify taxpayers, and this includes both businesses as well as tax-exempt organizations. So in order to apply for an EIN, we would recommend doing it online. It's the easiest and quickest way. However, the online application process is only available to US-based institutions. That definition is entities whose principal business, office, agency, or legal residence is located in the United States or in one of the US territories. If applying online isn't possible for you, you can fill out the SS4, which is the form you need to fill out in order to obtain an EIN, and then send the form either via mail or fax. You can find the fax number and the mailing address on the link, through the link on the slide. If you're an international applicant, you should call the number on the screen. Hours of operations are 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday, and definitely plan in advance. Well, if you do apply online, you should be able to receive your EIN immediately upon completion, provided that, you know, there are no issues. But if you're applying via fax or via mail, it'll take a lot longer, you know, a couple of weeks, perhaps even a month if you're applying by mail. Let's see. Next slide, please. So during the registration process, you will be asked to identify the responsible party, and the responsible party is the principal officer, general partner, owner, trustor, grantor. So unless the applicant is a government entity, the responsible party must be an individual. And the instructions on how to fill out the SS4, which is the form you need to register, is on the first link on the slide. And the second link takes you to the portal in which you would apply online. But please note that you can't save your progress and come back. So once you start the registration process online, you have to finish it in the same session. Next slide, please. So the unique entity ID is the next step in the process. It used to be known as the DUNS number, but now it's the same concept. The federal government uses it as an identification for institutions who are submitting grants. Although it doesn't expire, you will have to renew it annually in order for it to remain in the active registration status, which is what you would need if you're applying to grants. Next slide. So I'm assuming since you're here at the webinar, most of you are interested in being the prime awardee or the institution applying directly for a federal grant. So if that's the case, you will have to complete the registration process on sam.gov. However, for organizations acting, say in the capacity of a sub-awardee, then you may only need to obtain a UEI without completing the whole registration process. Please refer to the entity registration checklist, link is on the slide, to inform you on what you may need in the registration process, or if you're just obtaining a UEI. Instructions can be found on the first link in the slide. And if you run into any issues, please go to the sam.gov help resources page, which is the second link on the slide. In either case, though, whether you're registering or if you just want to obtain a UEI, you will need to set up a sam.gov account. And then, of course, refer to the entity registration checklist to prepare the data you need in order to register or to just get a UEI. And if you are registering your organization, you will receive a UEI in the registration process. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, this is just a continuation of before. We can move on to the next slide. Thank you. So grants.gov is the system NOAA uses to receive applications. Instructions on how to create an account can be found in the first link in the slide. Once you create an account, you have to add a profile. Adding a profile is necessary in order to submit an application. And instructions on how to do that can be found in the second link on the slide. And should you run into any issues, please review the resources provided by Grants Online in the third link. If you're unable to find a solution via the FAQs and all their guidance documents, you can create a ticket and someone from grants.gov will assist you. They are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, excluding federal holidays. So you should be able to get help, no matter the hour of the day. And also please note that registering for grants.gov may take 3 to 5 business days, or if you don't complete the process correctly, it may take as long as 4 weeks. If you have to all the back and forth with the help desk. So please don't wait until the deadline is near before you get registered. Next slide, please. So once you've registered for grants.gov, you will need to create what's called a workspace. Instructions on how to create a workspace can be found at the link on top of the slide. This is a really good resource. So if you scroll all the way down on the page, you'll actually find a link to a playlist of instructional videos that offer step-by-step directions on how to create your workspace, how to add participants to the workspace, how to complete the federal financial forms, etc. So please utilize that. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Anne. That's really helpful. I appreciate it. Okay, so Alec, if you could go to the next slide. Okay, great. So just briefly on the review process, I think I've mentioned it a few times here, but we do have a peer review process. We have 2 stages, and these are outlined in the NOFO. And I do need to go back and check those percentages against the NOFO. But stage 1 is the technical review panel, and they're going to be looking for the scientific technical merit, the qualifications of the team, the appropriateness of the budget to the task being proposed, the outreach and education component, and diversity and inclusion component. Then there's a second stage where the proposals are reviewed for relevance to the AdSci program and to NOAA, and then these are put together, and a ranking of the applications is established based on the total score from this process. Of course, how many proposals, how far down that list we're able to go will depend on our availability of funding. And as those of you who have worked with the federal government before or received funding, we don't receive our budgets early anymore. And by early, I mean by at the beginning of the fiscal year. So we won't know the final availability of funds for this competition until a little bit later in the process. But obviously we try to fund as many projects as we can on that list based on the ranking. Okay, and one more note, I will say our funding competitions tend to be pretty competitive. So we always get far more good proposals than we're able to fund, unfortunately. But we try to do as many as we can. All right, next, Alec. Okay, so what happens once you receive funding as a result of this competition? We really try to engage quite a bit with our PIs, both to learn from them and to help them kind of learn from each other. We tend to do a lot of peer-to-peer learning through communities of practice and potentially meetings where researchers share their work. Oops, hold on a minute. Where researchers share their work with each other and with other programs supported by CSI. We have people come in and do seminars and webinars as often as we can. I will note, and this is in the NOFO, that these awards will be grants, but they'll be a specific kind of grant, which is a cooperative agreement. And that's because we like to have a lot of engagement with our PIs. So you may be aware that that's a different type of award, but it's still a grant from the federal government. Okay, next, Alec. So just an overview of the timeline. Once again, January 31st is the deadline for the proposals. We'll hold review panels probably in late winter, early spring. Then recommendations for funding will be made at the end of that review process, and that's usually late spring to early summer. One thing I will say that, at times we have to have people submit revised paperwork for one reason or another. Should you find yourself in that situation, you want to be super responsive because we will be working on a very tight timeline when we get to that stage. And once again, all projects should use September 1st, 2023 as the start date. All right, next. I think we've covered everything in the first two bullets, thanks to Anne. Full proposals, yep, through grants.gov. For-profit institutions are eligible to apply, but just a reminder that the results of the work are public and cannot benefit one entity or be used for profit. I mentioned earlier, federal employees requesting support should reach out directly to me. Just as a note, we cannot support federal salaries, and any funding that is awarded through this process has to go through the development of an interagency agreement, which then must be reviewed and approved by the offices of general counsel at NOAA and the applying agency. So it's just kind of a different process. So just a heads up on that. Matching funds and cost sharing are not required, but we really do encourage you to identify leveraging and in-kind contributions of resources within the proposal. That's always really helpful. And then just a link to our frequently asked questions. So I think that is everything we have on our end, unless Anne or Amanda or others have other quick notes they want to throw in there. And otherwise, Amanda, if you want to help us walk through the Q&A session, that would be great.
Sure, I can go ahead and start reading some of the questions out loud. So the first question that we have is, can you speak again to private sector eligibility for this competition and any rules associated with this eligibility?
Yeah, and I think I just touched on that one, but once again, private sector organizations are eligible, but you have to read carefully the data management policy, and particularly for private sector organizations, you want to read that closely. The data are public, and the research cannot be used to benefit any one entity for profit.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next question is, can you speak to what is allowed in this competition as far as stakeholder involvement in the research process?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very open and actually looking for new ways to engage with stakeholders as part of our research. So, it could be, workshops, could be surveys, could be, engaging a stakeholder as part of your research team, for example. Be creative. We don't have any limitations as to how stakeholders can be involved in the project, I guess is the best way to say. So just throwing out some ideas. And one thing you could look at is, if you're looking for ideas, because I can't tell the way the question is written, it sounds like you're looking for the limits, but I will also say if you're looking for ideas, you can look through previously funded projects.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The next one is this competition limited to the use of existing NOAA resources or data or collaborations?
No, it is not. No, we're open to partnerships that are going to help you get the job done. We do like to see that if there are opportunities to benefit the project by the use of NOAA data or partnerships, that those are addressed in the proposal. And as part of a kind of broad agency with a pretty broad mission, it is nice for us to see collaboration happening kind of in the field. But it's not a requirement.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Can you share some examples of international partnerships that have been supported by the AdSci program?
Yeah, that's a good question because the program, well, I mentioned earlier, the program was established in 2021. It really builds on actually decades of work within the Climate Program Office, formerly known as the Office of Global Programs, if there are any old timers on the call. It really builds on a long history of working internationally. So I don't know how helpful it would be to go into tons of detail, but you can look on our website and you can see a couple of things that are current. We have our blue carbon inventory project, which Alec mentioned in his introduction. And that is working with some partners at EPA and at the Marine Protected Areas Center in NOAA to engage with other countries to incorporate coastal blue carbon into their national greenhouse gas inventories, and also to explore the role of blue carbon in coastal resilience planning and management. And then we have another partnership currently underway with the local 2030 Islands Network, where we're working with them in communities of practice and in a couple of key areas like sustainable and regenerative tourism. And then we have supported research that is, actually, if you look on the IRAP section, I think it's under IRAP, on our webpage, you'll see the types of research that we've conducted in the Caribbean, India, and probably primarily the Americas, actually, with the climate and health focus.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, the next question, as far as geographic focus, if we are to include Belize in our proposal, which is not an island, but included in the Region A list, would that fit into the parameters of the competition?
Yeah, and we do have Belize listed there, and there's some kind of back and forth about that. But what I would do is think about Belize from a coastal perspective, or at least about kind of how coastal and inland links together. But the competition is focused on issues that are of kind of shared interest and relevance to islands. So I would keep that framing if you're proposing to work in Belize.
Great. Okay. Can there be a component of research focused on global/international scale and other components honing research in on Region A/B countries as in-depth case studies of wider adaptation issues? So, for example, mainstreaming nature-based solutions.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think the answer is yes. I think you just want to make sure that your methodology is clear and well thought out. But yeah, you could totally do that.
Great. Next question, can the research be multi-country, including, for example, a Region A country like Grenada, region B country like Vanuatu and another country in Africa?
So yes, on the multi-country, but for right now, we're limiting the study sites to that are funded by this program. So let me caveat that. So we're limiting the study sites to the countries and jurisdictions that are listed in the NOFO. That having been said, if you are asking for funding to support the portion of the project that addresses the work in the countries in our list, but it's complementing or leveraging work that's being done in Africa, I think that's totally fine for this case. But just one question that sometimes comes up when people refer to leveraging in their proposal is if the funding is not locked in for the other part of the project. In other words, if what you're leveraging is a proposal that you have into another agency, but you don't know if you have it yet, that can sometimes raise the issue of, well, if they don't get that leveraged funding, are they going to be able to complete the work successfully? So when you are talking about leveraging another project, two things. One, you want to make sure that that project is fully funded and kind of guaranteed. So there's no question about whether or not you can actually do the work with the resources. And then the other is you want to make sure that that it's very clear what your funding is going to do versus other funding that you might have.
Great, thank you. The next question is, does the page limit include letters of support?
No, I don't think so. I need to go back and look at that slide, but it's on the slide. I don't think letters of support are included in the page limit, but we need to look at that slide.
Hi, Lisa. Yeah, you're right. Letters of support are not included in the page limit.
Thank you, Anne.
Great. Okay, the next question is, can you confirm the start date for the projects again? And I believe we went over this, it's September 1st, 2023, but can you confirm that, Lisa?
Yep, that's it, September 1st. It seems like such a long way away, but it goes by fast.
It definitely does. The next question is, how many awards do you envision? And I think we talked a little bit about this before, that it depends on submissions and available funding.
Yeah, exactly, Amanda. Yeah, we don't know our budget at this point. Based on kind of what we anticipate, we're thinking 11 to 13 proposals funded.
Great. The next question is, can the budget allow payment to hire a company for conducting surveys, or can we budget survey incentives for participants?
So I'm going to give an answer, and then I'm going to turn to Anne to just kind of clarify. But yeah, you can do sub-awards or subcontracts as long as you're very clear about that in the narrative and then also in your budget tables. And then I believe that we can include survey incentives, kind of honoraria for participants in workshops or surveys now. Is that right, Anne?
I'm not quite sure if the guidance has changed on that, but I will get back to you. But yeah, you are right about as long as it's clear in the budget narrative that they are using a sub-awardee or subcontractor, and that's allowed.
Okay, and what we'll do is we'll make sure to note this one in the frequently asked question. We'll include this in the FAQ update about the incentives. I'm pretty sure we can, and I don't remember if there's additional guidance for that, but we'll make sure and update that in the next 24 hours.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. The next question is there a preference for projects that work in more than one of the listed countries?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that essentially we're thinking about this overall program competition as, fostering engagement and collaboration among countries, because we will be bringing the PIs together to talk about their work, hopefully PIs and their partners. So no, I don't think there's a preference, and there's not one officially in the NOFO either. So, yep.
Okay, and I'm going to take one more question. Do proposals have to include an international partner / case study, or can they only focus on one domestic context? So for example, if it was focused in Hawaii.
Yeah, they can, proposals and projects can focus on one particular island within the U.S. jurisdiction. We do want to encourage a regional distribution and kind of balance of projects. So I'll just note that. And if we could think about when you're writing proposals and doing your applications, like kind of how is this important in terms of the island context? Like islands are unique, unique parts of our geography. What makes it that way, and how will this work contribute to our understanding and kind of management of resources and risk in the context of islands? So in that sense, we'd like people to be kind of thinking a little bit broadly about the implications of their work, but the work can be done in one particular site.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And we're right at 4 o'clock, so we will end on that question.
Okay, that sounds good. And if there are others, it looks like we got through a lot of them. So if there are others that we didn't get to, feel free to email us. We'll do our best to get back to you quickly. And just to underscore Anne's suggestions about starting the kind of administrative process of the proposal development soon, I think that would be great. Just so if you do run into trouble, there are helplines and people, as she mentioned, set up to provide assistance, and they know those systems better than we do. So we encourage you to go to them with any questions you might have about kind of the getting the EIN and all of that information. But if you have other questions about the competition, please feel free to email us. And thank you so much for your time today and for your interest in the AdSci program.